of the street had to be put out. So we shot at it with our slingshots. We kept missing. So Dan climbed the telephone pole to get closer, and he got it. The cops came, but nothing happened to us. We also shot out other street lights and would hit short iron golf shots in the front lot fronting the admissions hall of the college, a block down the street, until one golf ball sailed through the window of the dean of men's office. We never went back. On a couple of occasions, we snuck into the yard of a big house near our elementary school and swam in the pool while they were in Europe. One early evening, the lights in the house came on, so we hightailed it over to the elementary school, retrieved our golf clubs from the little grove of trees, and began hitting balls. The cops drove by and asked if we had seen anyone running from the big house. Well, we were dripping wet, but we said, oh no, that we had been hitting golf balls all afternoon. They drove away, no doubt killing themselves laughing. At high school, we helped put a cow on the second floor of the building. I'm sorry. And had chair day where we stacked up all the chairs in all the rooms. Never heard a word about either incident. Very discouraging. Even though I didn't see him very often in later years, I knew he was there, and I miss him. Those indeed were the days. I miss him every day now. From his brother, Larry. I recall when I was in 5th or 6th grade. Dan was 2 years ahead of me and still going to school at Hamilton Elementary. One day I let my mouth overload my brain and got in a fight with an older kid, who I soon found out I couldn't beat. The kid was on top of me, hitting me pretty hard and often, and Dan ran over and pulled him off of me, punched him a few times, and told him to leave his little brother alone. Up until then, I didn't believe Dan liked me very much. That day, I realized what brotherly love is. Dan, I love you and miss you very much. I hope we get to play ball again soon in the big ballpark in the sky. Larry. And from his sister, Glenda, or Mimi, as she was called. Dan was 5 years older than I, so our close relationship developed after we became adults. Maybe that is the way all great sibling bonds are forged when there is an age difference. He was one of the most generous men I have ever known, with a true concern for others and a deep sense of family. Although we were many miles apart, he was always there for me with love, understanding, and sound advice when needed. He brought much joy to my life, and I always enjoyed his visits home to Louisiana. We would eat crawfish, boudin, rice and gravy, catch up on our lives, and share much laughter while reminiscing about years gone by. He and I would play tennis, and he would golf with his dad and brothers. He would not think of coming down without hauling his golf clubs and tennis racket, in addition to his luggage. It looked like he was coming for an extended visit instead of one for 1 week. He had a wicked sense of humor, and very little got past him without a sly remark, all in jest, of course. He derived much pleasure from his deep love of music and was proud of his accomplishments, even though his neighbors did not always share his joy. The four siblings spent 3 days together in July, exactly 1 month prior to his death. Even though it was painful to see his decline, we had many tales to tell and shared much laughter. We will always treasure those moments. I have been truly blessed to have him in my life and an honor to call him brother. Although he is in my heart, he will be sorely missed. Signed, Mimi, or Hey Dare, as all of his emails began. And now I would like to call Daryl up to make a statement.
I know it's 2 pages. Don't worry, the font's just really big. I'm getting old. Let me apologize in advance if I do this wrong. I've never had an opportunity to do anything quite like this. But I've also never had the privilege of talking about a man quite like Dan. Or as my friends who knew and played golf with him and I would say behind his back, Lieutenant Dan. Not because we wanted to denigrate his service to our country that rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel, but just because we want to do our stupid Forrest Gump impression. My group of friends that knew him had great respect and admiration for Dan, especially for the service to our country. Dan had a real beauty and a heart that was sometimes hard to understand, that was multifaceted, much like the beauty of a diamond. Dan was always admired and loved, sometimes even to the point he didn't want it.
Yeah.
He would come over to our home on special occasions like Christmas, looking sharp in his leather sport coat that you see on your program today. Unfortunately for him, no matter where that coat went, our cat Bubbles would find it.
Oh.
And lay on it. Arm of the chair, top of the couch, in the closed bedroom, didn't matter to cat. He'd find it and lay on it. Dan would have to run around and chase him off. Dan had a curious mind. He would often stand out on Thanksgiving when I was barbecuing a 20-pound turkey and stand out in the rain with me and figure out, well, how are you doing that, Daryl? Well, what? And it was, I don't know what he's doing out in the rain. There should be just one idiot standing out there, but no, there was two. While some of us take on life as a wrestling match, trying to wring out the last gasp of life or approach it like a float tube down a river, Dan, it wasn't quite like that. He saw life for what it was, the present, that God had given us and embraced the thing called life. Not since I have attended a 6-year-old's birthday party have I seen the honored birthday boy so gleefully revel in wearing a paper crown around the party all day as we did the day we celebrated Dan's 80th birthday. Mm-hmm. This tall, gray-haired man wearing a silly paper gold crown with a smile as big as the sky. Man, that was a sight. Dan loved to be outside competing in sports. Dan enjoyed being with the boys out on the golf course, as you've already heard. Oh, yeah. Dan, a couple friends of mine, you might remember, the Lieutenant Dan crowd, and I myself were playing golf on a par 5. For those of you who don't know what par 5 is on a golf course, it's just the longest hole, and 5 shots to get into the hole is a good score. Well, Dan hits his 4th shot, and he's about 10 feet from the putting green, and he chips it up there and he chunks it, which means he hit it really short. He says, wait, drops another ball, sculls it square across the putting green, okay? And he says, no, wait, 3rd ball, chips that, nope, takes another 4th out, hits, chips, yeah, I like that. Walks up to the green, or walks up to the hole, puts it in. As we're walking off the hole, we're all yelling out our scores to the scorekeeper. He says, yeah, I'll take a 6. Sorry, Dan, had to, man. But at Dan's core, he really did have compassion for others. One of his favorite Bible verses is Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 10. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and no one can help them up. The last night before the battle with his health really began in earnest, we were gathered together for dinner for ribs that Dan so badly wanted. And, well, okay, to be honest, I don't mind barbecue either. We go to dinner, and I've already stated flatly to my mother and to my wife that as a thank you to Dan and my mom for taking such good care of my wife when she was down here for a month, I was paying the bill. No doubt. No, I wasn't going to let him do it. Well, we enjoy a nice meal at dinner, and our waitress that we had, she was extremely pregnant. And so we proceeded to have the meal, and it was wonderful. And during the course of the conversation, she confesses, this is her second waitress job, that she was just trying to make ends meet before the baby came. Well, and Dan, another argument, of course, ensues. I have the bill. He can't do anything about it. But he insists on leaving the tip so he can leave her a 45% tip to, as he said as he handed it to her, take care of the baby when it comes. Yep. Be well, Dan. You'll be missed. Keep hitting them straight, baby.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Daryl, you did it right. A reading from Ecclesiastes 3. There's an opportune time to do things, a right time for everything on the earth, a right time for birth and another for death, a right time to plant and another to reap, a right time to search and another to count your losses, a right time to hold on and another to let go, a right time to rip out and another to mend, a right time to shut up and another to speak. Yet so much of our lives are spent with vanity and striving after wind. God makes everything beautiful in itself and in its time. I've concluded that whatever God does, that's the way it's going to be, always. No addition, no subtraction. God's done it, and that's it. That so will come to acceptance and simply worship in holy awe. Whatever was, is. Whatever will be, is. That's how it always is with God. At this time, I'd like to invite family friend Paul to come up and speak.
Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Reed, and I'm really glad to be here tonight. Today, not yet. What a great turnout for a great guy. You know, I was just sitting back there thinking about my relationship with Dan wasn't as intimate as a lot of people here. We were both shared a lot of similarities, common life things, but I didn't go to meetings with Dan because he lives out here and I live in another part of the San Fernando Valley. And but you know, I first really got to know who Dan Daigle was through the Cabrito Foundation. I've been involved in that for many, many years. It's a men's recovery house in the West Valley, and we have a golf tournament every year. And I don't think a year went by where Dan didn't get in touch with me at least 5 to 6 times, letting me know our group's together. We're going to have our group there, right? I just got you, Dan. I know you're like clockwork, but he'd feel compelled to call me up and say, the group's here. Everybody's going to be, and he'd just let me know. And even this past year, when he was in intensive care, he still, I mean, before he went into the hospital, he goes, yeah, everybody's coming down. I'm going to get a cart, and I'm going to ride along with them and everything else. And then Darlene, when I'm in, I don't think Dan's going to make it to the golf tournament. I said, really? No, but what a great guy. You know, the thing that I was just thinking about back there that attracts me to so many people and the friends that I have is Dan Daigle was a giver. You know, I was talking about it with my friend on the way over here. We all know a lot of givers and there's takers. And I don't know, overwhelmed with the takers, but the givers really stand out. Dan was one of those guys. He was a bitching guy, man. We went out to lunch a few times this last year, and that was, each time it was pretty cool. Excuse my language. I've just remembered bitching may not be, it may be a swear word. I don't know. It's just from the 60s type of thing.
Yeah.
Forgive me.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty clean for me, actually. And we'll keep it at that. But forgive me. But, you know, we went out to lunch a few times. It was just awesome, you know, because and he'd have just great little things and all his little writings and his little cards that he'd print up on his computer and stuff. It was just special. And I know a lot of people had that kind of relationship with him in here. And then he did something really cool. September 16th, 2013. It was at H&I. I knew Dan and Darlene. I've known Darlene for many, many years, and I knew Dan and Darlene from H&I for many years. And I played golf with a couple of good friends of mine, Randy Schwartz and Cranky, the day before. And I'd broken par for the first time in my life. And I was pretty happy about it. So I saw Dan. I said, guess what happened yesterday? And he goes, what? I said, I broke par. He goes, you did? I said, yeah. He goes, guys like us don't do that very often. I said, you're telling me, right? he goes, why didn't you do me a favor and write down your scores, how it was? And of course, I remembered just about every shot, right? And I wrote down my scores, and then he goes, because I think I'm going to get something made for you. And I said, that's kind of cool, right? I didn't tell him I broke par so I could get something. A few weeks later, he calls me up, and he says, I had this made for you. And I finally get the chance to share it, right? Because you don't walk around with trophies, right? And look what I got, you know? I mean, that's kind of like... But he had this made for me. It has all my scores. This is Dan Daigle. From the day before, I did it on September 15th. For some people, it's easy. For me, it's unbelievable. But the par here is broken. And that's how he designed it, right? Because he had it, because par's broke. Pretty cool stuff. It's maybe the coolest trophy I've ever gotten in my life, and because it always came from Dan's inspiration. And then something else happened that year. It's really cool just to talk about who Dan was. He gave me a CD. He goes, I play saxophone. I said, really? And he goes, I play jazz saxophone. And so, I do a lot of traveling with work, and I got his CD, and I listened to it, and when I called him up, I said, that's awesome, dude. I said, you're pretty good, for an old guy that can't stand up straight. That's pretty cool stuff. And he goes, yeah, I just like it. I said, I have an idea. I wonder if you'd be willing to participate. And, we have this open house holiday buffet at Cabrito House every year. And I said, how'd you like to play saxophone for some Christmas carols at our open house this year? He goes, I'd love it, right? I mean, he jumped all over it. And that's Dan Daigle. Every time I'd say something that might imposition somebody, he just said, yeah. He always followed through. The guy was amazing. And it rained like cats and dogs that Christmas. And he was in Jensen Hall. He's got his little corner set up. And we had a lot of people. The place was packed. It might have been our best turnout in many, many years. And there's Dan with the saxophone. It was awesome. And then he couldn't make it the following year, and he's here this last year, too. And Dan will be missed, man. He's one of the good guys. Always has been. Some of us feel privileged to have guys like him in our life. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to be reading from Ecclesiastes, and at this time I'd like to invite friend Marilee up during that time to make her way up here while I'm reading. So from Ecclesiastes 9. I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. Marilee.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Wasn't Dan just the most amazing person? We just loved he and Darlene so much. And try very hard not to cry because Dan was one of my favorite people. But we have known, my husband Steve and I have known Dan and Darlene for many, many years. We, a few years ago, decided to participate in a Bible study. And it was really, really fun. We had such a good time with some other people from our church. And we got this great idea that why don't we take this Bible study to the cerebral palsy home in Westlake? Great idea, because one of our longtime residents was a resident of the cerebral palsy home. And with that particular condition, communication is a little bit difficult. Many of the people cannot voice words, so they either have soundboards or they use hand gestures. So we thought this is going to be a great idea. And Dan was sort of our guiding force in this. So we got together and we decided to begin the program, and we did. And Dan put so much effort into this. We all tried, but Dan he had the gift. Sure. And it's in this program that I really saw one of the great gifts God had given Dan, and that's to meet people where they're at, how they are, no judgment, just to love them and be with them. we would do the program, and he would have people laughing and giggling. The turnout was amazing because no one had ever come up to do a program like that. And they would just wait and wait and wait for Dan to show up. We're not sure how much of the Bible study that they got, but what they did get was knowing that people cared about them. They laughed, they joked. Each one of our sessions started with Dan making a joke. Well, you could call it a joke. I guess that's up for interpretation, but they loved it, and we all loved it. The fact that Dan brought compassion and humor, he was so non-judgmental, and he put his whole soul into everything that he did. That will always be my memory of Dan. He was so funny. He loved chocolate. He loved fun things. But boy, when he was committed to something, he was totally committed. He was committed to Darlene. He was committed to the Lord. And he was committed to all of you that are here today. So I just wanted to mention that because sometimes people come from different parts of Dan's life. But when I saw that, I thought, boy, God gave us a really blessed person in our lives.
I'd like to read to you from the Gospel according to John, chapter 21, the Dan Revised Version Standard. And in our tradition, we always stand for the words of Jesus. So if you would please stand for us.
Yeah.
The words of Jesus via Dan. This one's closer than the others. Yeah. With Marilee's words in mind and the condition of folks with cerebral palsy in mind, I think this reading, which is on one of Dan's folders that he handed to me, is fitting. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time, Jesus said to Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Now, Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him this third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." This is the gospel of our Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Well, I get the honor of kind of telling you the backstory, which some of you might know, and then sharing some of my own memories. Richard Dan Daigle was born in Lake Charles, Louisiana in April 1935 to Abe and Sarah. He already had an older brother, Johnny, who told us some colorful stories about their childhood. And by the time the family moved to Lafayette, Dan was 7 years old, and then another brother came, Larry, and a sister, Glenda, who you heard is called Mimi, because that's how she'd refer to herself as a baby, Mimi. Abe sold life insurance, and Grace and Abe had met in the hospital when Abe had gone in for some appendicitis. Grace was a doctor. They lived, and I found this interesting detail that even you knew this, at 213 General Gardner Street in Lafayette. He was a kid with paper route, had to fold those papers just right to make them fly. Early on, he was interested in things flying right. He still has friends from his childhood. They got in a lot of trouble. I don't need to review Johnny's statement, cutting down all the good trees for a fort. But Dan always remembered all the punishment was always worth all the fun. And I think that was a motto by which he lived his life, although I never heard that Danism. He went to Lafayette High School, University of Southwestern Louisiana in Lafayette, apparently called Ooh La La, which just makes sense for Dan. The Ragin' Cajuns. He has a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, graduated from high school in 1953 and undergraduate in 1957 from Ooh La La. He remembered how easy it was to get to school. He went to elementary school by turning left going outside of his house and down the street. And then he went to high school and he turned right and went down the street a couple blocks. And then he went to college and just had to cross the street. It was that easy for him. Good thing, too, because he got distracted an awful lot according to his brothers. Dan loved music early on in life. He started playing clarinet and saxophone in high school. In 1953, Dan and some buddies formed one of the earliest rhythm and blues groups of that time. Their 9-piece band was called the Modernaires, 50s. Played Glenn Miller, Woody Herman type of music and rock and roll, early versions. They were very popular. In fact, a write-up and photo of the group can be found in the Lafayette Parish Clerk of Court's office. At least it's not in the post office. Sounds like that could have happened too. Dan has often told the tale of how he ended up in the Air Force. While he was attending Ooh La La, now called ULL, I like the earlier version, he was required to take 2 years of physical education while at college, and he didn't want to do that. And you could replace that with ROTC. So that's what he did. And after 2 years were up, he was going to leave ROTC, but the commander asked him to stay and be the leader of the ROTC marching band. And so he stayed in the ROTC. He graduated with this BS in electrical engineering and commissioned in the Air Force as a second lieutenant. He served as a navigator for a C-130 aircraft. He was a navigation and electronics instructor. He was a navigation and maintenance officer in Vietnam and Okinawa. He served between 1957 and 1978. Before he went into service, he worked for Douglas here in Los Angeles, and then, of course, enlisted. As with all the military guys, and the 5 of them in the honor guard in the back can attest to this, you were sort of a product to where the service would like to send you. So he was at Edwards Air Force Base and Wright-Patterson in Ohio and in San Antonio and many other places, as well as active duty, and of course mustered out at Air Base Los Angeles in El Segundo. He was a navigator, and then he taught navigation, and an officer in charge of the motor pool in Okinawa. I thought that was kind of interesting. Worked for the General Inspector's Office of the Air Force. The General Inspector, and this is one of the places where one of my favorite Danisms came from. He said, it went like this. He'd show up from the Inspector General's office, and the 2 biggest lies you'd ever heard were, he would say, "We're here to help you." And the people that had received them would lie, "We're glad to see you."
Yep.
All those years, he's still telling that one. In September, he told that one in the hospital. I mean, not that long ago.
Yeah.
2 lies. In September 1965, he was a navigator of a C-130 airplane out of Saigon to Quy Nhon. It was the 5th mission of the day, and the plane was 3 miles out from the runway when suddenly it hit a downdraft and it went into the water. The plane split in half just behind the cockpit. Dan saw the pilot climb out the window. Now, any Air Force folks out there? I know there are a couple members. Yeah, big windows there in the cockpit, aren't there? 12 by 7 inches. Dan said he and the pilot left quite a bit of skin on that window, but with the pilot's help, he got out of the window 14 feet underwater. Half the crew didn't make it out at all. It was a moment that changed Dan's life forever. In 1967, Dan received a master's degree of program management from the Air Force Institute of Technology in Dayton, and he worked as a program manager and director and Air Force Inspector General from '68 until his retirement as a lieutenant colonel in 1978. Upon retirement from the Air Force, he went back into the civilian sector, worked for as a missile field test engineer for Hughes Aircraft in Chatsworth until his final retirement in 1997. Dan's love for music prompted him to form another small group in the 70s after his retirement, 1978. in Redondo Beach called the Redondo Beach Trio. I think we had some pictures on the slides as well of that. I have that in my this is my CD holder, if you were wondering. These are my CDs from Dan. So somebody mentioned the CDs from Dan with the pictures and sayings and Danisms in them. So we had this group in Redondo Beach, and they played country clubs and military clubs and weddings and parties until '82. Then Dan was on a musical hiatus until he got excited about joining our worship team here at New Hope Lutheran Church. Actually, it was Westlake Lutheran at the time, I think, when he started playing with us. We were over in Westlake. He loved being part of the group, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning so he could be here ahead of time to play. Now, we don't meet till 8:30. Just military time, apparently. Oh, dark hundred. Dan started playing the saxophone at a lot of other venues as well, and you heard some of that conversation at the cerebral palsy residence where folks would literally dance in their chairs, and they thought his Danisms were funnier than I did. Dan played at the Murphy Auto Museum, the Vintage Airstream exhibit in Oxnard, to add the 50s ambiance, and at the historic Glen Tavern Lounge in Santa Paula. The perfect saxophone picture, which is on the slides as well, of Dan at the Glen. Darlene calls it her God picture. It just was a quick one, and it turned out to be a beautiful shot of him all in black. If it wasn't orange, it was black. What was that? All in black, and that beautiful silver fox hair he had playing his saxophone. Everybody seemed to enjoy his saxophone except one particular stubborn neighbor in his neighborhood who couldn't take the over and over scale that he was playing most of the morning. Enough already. Dan was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2003. Has it really been that long? He had a great team of doctors and great medication, and he was able to continue to play tennis and golf long after that diagnosis, only stopping in 2009 after it was too difficult to play tennis. His mind was way ahead of his feet, which was usually the case. His feet, his mouth, whatever. You want to make sure that was happening. He continued to play golf, even playing 9 holes at Westlake in April of this year. He loved animals, especially dogs, but he would dovetail his love for animals with his love for music. So he had a sheepdog named Bird, after the jazz player Charlie the Bird Parker. His Shar-Pei was Clifford, named after Clifford Brown, the jazz trumpeter. More recent years, he moved off that theme when he got black and white dogs, these Boston Terriers, Boss and Tuxedo, which is weird because he'd occasionally call me Boss, now that I think about it. What does that mean? Did he call you Boss, Eleanor? Our staff musician back there probably was called Boss too, and I'm not sure anymore that was a compliment now that I put this together. He made sure that he cared for his dog. He walked him every morning. Even when he was walking with a walker, he continued to walk Tuxedo every morning and make sure they had plenty of fresh water and plenty of love. He and Darlene met in 1988 and brought more family into Dan's life, along with Darlene, of course, his brothers, Johnny and Larry and Glenda. He has 3 nieces, 3 nephews, 2 grandnieces, 6 great-nephews. Darlene added her son and daughter-in-law and a granddaughter, Katie. And we heard, and I really think that, talk about trophies, how do you get a grown stepson to cry at your funeral? He did it right. That's something else. They did a lot of service work together, speaking in recovery programs. That's how they met. Dan would pull up to the curb in his Mitsubishi 3000, this red Sportster there, go to talk to a bunch of alcoholics. Dan and Darlene had their first date May 20th, 2000, and they married a little over a year later at the Westlake Inn in September of 2001. Dan had to plan the entire wedding because at the time, Darlene was finishing up her master's thesis, and he wanted her to make sure that she had that done, so he planned the wedding. I wonder how that went. They got married, that's all that matters. Yeah. They moved to Westlake to a quiet neighborhood to enjoy their home, quiet except for saxophone, enjoy their home where Dan could plant and work hard to maintain his grass and his roses and his azalea. Dan was a rock-solid man with high principles to serve other people. Integrity and faith, this is what Darlene writes. He felt that one had to talk to the man in the white suit in the next life, and one wanted to be able to tell him about plenty of good and kind acts to others. He loved to joke and make other people laugh, sometimes with a very dry sense of humor. He had a great way with words, he did, turning a phrase so that the plain statement became interesting little storyline. What a guy. Danisms. One of my favorites was this. He said this, I think, down in Camarillo. I have a TV set and a wife. Do you know the rest of it? And they both work.
Ooh.
I won't keep that. My wife over there. Or if you want to make God laugh,
Tell him your plans.
tell him your plans. I was going to say, that's a program saying, too. He had 1 million of them. In fact, what we want you to do is, so there was a guest book outside, and you were all very polite, and you wrote your names in it. And some of you wanted to write graffiti, but maybe on a funeral day you sort of contained yourself. Now, Dan wouldn't have. So we want you to go back to that book, and we want you to write your Danisms.
Ooh.
Now, it might be longer than a short sentence, but write something in there of some crazy statement that Dan made to you. Dan was someone who, in my perspective, worked really hard to have a better life. And he worked really hard so that other people could have a better life too. He spent some of his life, as he would say, a little off track. But he found his way back, and he made his health and his well-being the center of experience for himself and for others. He learned the best way to make it work was to give back, which he did in recovery groups, in individuals' lives, in church groups, and among people who are probably the least of the least with the United Cerebral Palsy Foundation. He, like his music, was soulful. And such soulfulness is a blessing to those around them. We all experienced it. He was far from perfect, and he would be the first one to say that because he was humble and he remembered his experience. And so he wasn't perfect, but he was often profound. He'd come out to worship after listening to me preaching for 20 minutes or so, some say longer, and then he would say, in the program we say, and then he'd give a Danism, which was that 10-word summary of my 1,000-word sermon, which I thought I need to remember this, and I wish I had written more of them down. The sermons would be shorter around here. But he understood what Christians call the gospel, the good news of God's love. For he'd often say that he was not much more than an old drunk who had been saved by the grace of God. And that's the case for all of us, whether we're old drunks or not. Grasping to believe it, we make changes in our lives to come in line with such an amazing love. Let me tell you a little bit of the good news of the gospel according to the Christian message. God has done it all. We aren't doing it. It's done. It's finished. God has, in Christ, has won the victory over sin and death. It's accomplished. You don't earn it. You don't even work toward it. He's done it all. It's sitting there as a free gift, baby. It's a bitchin' gift. I had to. I'm saving that. To all my members, I am so sorry.
You're not. Oh, get real. You're
The
not.
second and only time you've heard that word from this pulpit. I think he understands. You cannot possibly make God love you more than he already does. You cannot possibly make God more loving toward you than he already does. You don't have to get clean to have God love you. You don't have to be right to have God love you. God loves you right where you are and won't love you more if you change, but God wants and he invites you into a way of life that opens up the joys and wonders of living fully in God for yourself and for others. It's a completely life-affirming premise, is the gospel of Christ. God so loved the world, he gave. That's it. Don't let any other church pile stuff on top of it. God loves you exactly where you are, and you don't have to clean it up to make him love you more, but he has an idea about how things could be better, and they are. If God can so love a broken world and broken lives, Dan understood that maybe he could love himself, and that we could love ourselves, and that maybe we could love other broken lives too. And that's where the program came in. With God, there is always grace-based acceptance, belonging, and love. The invitation of the good news is just come home, where God always intended you to be, and embrace the way of life that leads to life. And that was Dan's joy, understanding that he was God's child and there was no one and nothing that could change it. And he lived with that kind of soulfulness in his music and his Danisms, in his commitment to the program. I had seen, so one of the groups was here, and so we occasionally see some bad behavior from drunks. And Dan, was always in the middle of it when it was happening. It wasn't even his group that night. And Dan is in the middle of it with his laugh. He laughed. Changed the entire thing. Just with a laugh. The hostilities fell apart. The problem became, the intractable problem became just a problem to solve just because Dan laughed and said something like, "Oh, let's wait a minute." It's grace. And Dad understood it. And for that, we're grateful. For such an example of soulfulness and for such an investment in human lives and in the guy in the white suit who couldn't possibly love him anymore. St. Paul, at the end of his life, wrote in 2 Timothy 4, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. From now on, there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, gives me on that day, not only to me, but to all who long for his appearing." So if you're out there today and still struggling in your story, remember the good news of this soulful life. God could not love you more. God could not love you more. You don't have to do anything to please God. He is super pleased with you already. Just love him back and see what kind of changes that God leads you into to the life that really is life. That's how I see our Dano or your Colonel. To God be the glory. Amen.
3, 4.